part three of my conversation with Dr. Levine, he speaks about how negative experiences and trauma accumulate within the body and the mind. No matter how hard we try to contain these experiences, they will persist until they essentially jam our systems. In other words, the human mind cannot will negative experiences away. We need to process these challenging experiences one spoonful at a time to experience the full enjoyment of life. Lastly, Dr. Levine speaks about how somatic or body techniques can quell the stress response in a way that can be implemented in real time under the most difficult circumstances that we face as first responders on the front line.
You know, one of the things I showed in some of these online things I've been doing is a thing with Walter Cronkite. And Walter Cronkite was a respected journalist, tremendously respected, and for good reason. And he, you know, I remember, I think it was 1960, where was it? 1961, maybe, I'm not sure. But I remember in the student union, there was a soap opera playing, and then they interrupted it to announce that President Kennedy had been shot. Mm-hmm. And then they went back to the programming, and then they interrupted again. And Walter Cronkite basically just said, here are the facts. This is what we know. This is what we don't know. Then the next time, he got a teletype that said that President Kennedy had died. And he announces that to the anxious nation. And you could see he has tears. So he gave the facts, but he also was there present. And in doing that, he was able to calm an anxious nation that might have acted out in different ways. I mean, really, you know, also Franklin Roosevelt, you know, when he said to an anxious nation at the beginning of World War II, the only thing that we have to fear is fear itself. And again, that is the danger, that we get stuck in the fear or we try to suppress it. But you know, that which we resist persists. So if we try to resist that, it pushes up. So we push down against it. So then it pushes up even more. And then we push even down on it even more. And so it seems like if we'll ever let go, it will just explode. Mm-hmm. So again, if we can open to these sensations, one small amount at a time, then we won't be overwhelmed by them, and that we will be able to be connected with our feelings. And again, to me, if somebody, you know, if I'm in an accident or if I see an accident, you know, often when I'm giving a lecture at, you know, in a hotel or something like that, somebody falls down some stairs. And so everybody runs to get them to stand up, which is exactly the thing you don't want to do.
Right.
I'll say again, I say, I'm a doctor, just let me in here. Again, a half-truth. And I'll just say to the person, I'm just going to sit here with you. I can see that you're in shock because you just fell and the shock will wear off. But let's not try to do anything yet. Let's just sit here together. And again, they go through that kind of gentle shaking and trembling and spontaneous breath. And then when they get up their balance, I've seen it when people get them to come up prematurely, they're completely out of balance and they're more likely to fall. Mm-hmm. Again, it's kind of interesting. Early in the year 2005, I walked out of my house into a balmy Southern California morning. The gentle warmth and sea breeze gave a lift to my step. It was the beginning of a perfect kind of day, a day when you feel certain that nothing can go wrong, when nothing bad can possibly happen. But it did. I walked along absorbed in happy anticipation of being with my dear friend Butch for the celebration of his 60th birthday. I stepped out into a crosswalk. The next moment, paralyzed and numb, I'm laying on the ground, unable to move or to breathe. I can't figure out what just has happened. How did I get here? Out of the swirling fog of confusion and disbelief, a crowd of people rushes toward me. They stop aghast. Abruptly, they hover over me in a tightening circle. Their staring eyes look fixed on my limp and twisted body. I orient myself and identify the real attacker. As in an old-fashioned flashbulb photo, I see a beige car looming over me with its teeth-like grille and shattered windshield. The door suddenly jerks open. A wide-eyed teenager bursts out. She stares at me in dazed horror. In a strange way, I both know and don't know what had happened. As the fragments begin to converge, they convey a horrible reality. I must have been hit by this car as I entered the crosswalk. In confused disbelief, I sink into a hazy twilight. And at that time, a young man came towards me. He announced himself as an off-duty paramedic. And so I started to look in his direction to orient to where the voice was coming from. And as I moved my head, he sharply commanded me, "Don't move, your neck could be broken." And of course, when you're in this situation, you hear it as your neck is broken.
Right.
You know, and in that moment, it's like I had this strange dislocation. It's literally like I left my body and was up above looking down at the scene, seeing myself sprawled out on the road and seeing the paramedic there. Just around at that moment, a woman came, and instead of talking to me from above, she sat down by my side and she said, "I'm a doctor, actually a pediatrician." And I remember thinking, that's exactly the kind of doctor I need right now. And she asked, "Is there anything I can do for you?" And I said, "Yes, please just sit here by me." And she reached out. As I say this, I feel the tears. She reached out with her hand, held my hand in hers. And then I could feel myself going through all of these physical changes, where I would feel waves of terror and vibration moving through my body, just like the I Ching talked about. And this went on for half an hour. And at the end, I looked at her and she looked at me, and our eyes met. And I knew that I was going to be okay. So shortly, then the ambulance came, and the paramedic, put me on one of those boards, and then, lifted me into the ambulance. And I remember, asking if we could go to the hospital near here, because then some of my friends could be with me. And they said, "I'm sorry, you may have internal injuries." So anyhow, so I'm in the ambulance, and the woman, the paramedic, is taking my pulse. She's my pulse and my blood pressure. And I asked her, and she did it like 2 or 3 times. I said, can you give me the readings? And she said, "I'm sorry, we can only give that to the doctors." And I said, a half truth. Well, I am a doctor. And, just not that kind of doctor. And I said something like, and she said, there must be something wrong. And then I replied, "Well, what do you mean?" And she said, "Well, your pulse is like 74 and your blood pressure is 120/70. And when they took your pulse at the paramedic, your pulse was going at about 160 beats a minute. So I think something's wrong with our machines, but that's okay. We'll do this when we get to the hospital." And I said, "I don't think there's anything wrong with your machine." And I started to tell her a little bit about what I did to get myself out of the shock and back enough into my body. And so I never miss an opportunity to proselytize. And so, I told her about kind of things I'm talking to you about. And so then I gave them a phone number so they could set up a 1-day program that we would offer for first responders. But basically, by being able to do the things of letting the fear move through my body, allowing the shaking and the trembling to occur, that reset my nervous system. So I was okay. And, and thankfully there were no internal injuries. My calf was about the size probably of your waist.
Okay.
And, but, I knew that I wasn't going to be traumatized by it. And it's, well, I mean, I had a lot of childhood trauma. So usually people who have significant childhood trauma, when something like this happens, they're really much, much, much more likely to be severely traumatized. But I knew that. And also my friends afterwards say, Peter, I don't know what happened, but you seem more grounded. You seem more connected to yourself. And I said, yeah, I think I know why. So again, first of all, if the paramedic had gotten down on the ground with me and made a little, like a momentary physical contact, that would have made a very big difference. Thankfully, the woman who came by, the pediatrician, she did sit by my side, and so I wasn't alone. And even though this is an approach I've developed over the past nearly 50 years, I don't know if I could have done it in the absence of her help, of her connecting, of her being with me.
Mm-hmm.
But by having that contact, and again, that's what we need. In this epidemic, they talk about social distancing. That's the wrong term.
Yeah.
It should be called physical distancing, social connection. And when we have that connection with each other, it helps us connect to that in ourselves. And it can really profoundly downregulate our stress responses. And again, in situations like this, that kind of accumulated stress is not helpful at all. And it even has an effect, we know, of suppressing the immune system. So that if we do get exposed, arguably, but in my opinion, if we do get to exposed, we're less likely to come down with the illness. Again, because our immune systems are in better shape, to a large degree because we're able to make contact with each other. So I very much would hope that first responders would come together, after a day of work or an episode of work. I was glad to do this with you. And again, for me personally in my life, first responders have at different times saved my life. So to give back in any small way is for me a great benefit.